There were exactly 3 words written on the whiteboard. Dad is leaving. Someone had written them in blue marker. Underneath, there was a rough list. Dining table, leather sofa, garage shelves, grandfather clock, wine collection, lawn equipment, television, recliner. It looked less like a family discussion and more like the inventory from an estate sale. I stood outside the half-open dining room door, holding a grocery bag with fresh bread and soup. No one inside knew I had come home early. Melissa's voice broke the silence. If we let him take everything, we'll end up buying it again. My son answered without hesitation. He doesn't need most of it. Another page flipped. The house is too big for him anyway. Someone laughed. Then Melissa asked the question that froze me where I stood. So, when are you actually telling him he has to move? Daniel replied so casually it sounded rehearsed. After his birthday. That way he won't make a scene. I looked down at the grocery bag still hanging from my hand. The soup was beginning to leak through the paper. That house had never belonged to Daniel, not legally, not financially, not emotionally. Every brick had a memory. The scratch on the hallway floor came from the bicycle he crashed when he was 8. The walnut tree outside still leaned slightly because he and I planted it crooked after a thunderstorm. His mother's fingerprints were probably still hidden beneath layers of paint in the kitchen she had renovated herself. Yet, somehow, they were already deciding who would own everything after I disappeared. While I was still alive, I quietly backed away before anyone noticed me. I placed the groceries inside my truck. Then I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in almost 4 years, Harrison & Cole attorneys at law. My appointment hadn't been scheduled. I simply walked in. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Mr. Mercer, I need to see Evelyn. Do you have an appointment? No, it's important. 20 minutes later, Evelyn Harrison walked into her office carrying 2 coffees. She smiled. This must be serious. It is. I didn't sit down. Instead, I asked only one question. If someone believes they're already inheriting everything, what happens when they're completely wrong? She looked at me for several long seconds, then quietly unlocked a fireproof cabinet. Inside sat a thick blue folder. My estate plan. She placed it on the desk. You've never once asked to see this since your wife passed away. I know. Why today? I thought about the whiteboard, the list, the laughter, the plans they were making before I'd even packed a suitcase. Then I answered with the calmest voice I'd ever used. Because my son just started dividing up my life, and he has absolutely no idea that none of it belongs to him anymore. I didn't change my will that afternoon. That would have been emotional, and emotion is expensive. Instead, Evelyn slid the blue folder back into the cabinet and folded her hands. Before we touch a single page, she said, I want to ask you something. I nodded. When was the last time your son believed you could surprise him? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment. Then I laughed. Probably when he was 10. She smiled. Then don't rewrite your will. I frowned. What? Rewrite his expectations? Over the next week, I did absolutely nothing. No confrontation, no accusations, no dramatic speeches. I attended my grandson Owen's baseball game. I took my granddaughter Lily to buy ice cream. I smiled through Sunday dinner. If Daniel felt guilty about the conversation I'd overheard, he hid it well. Melissa certainly did. She kept bringing up houses, retirement communities, low-maintenance condos, places where, according to her, people your age are happier. Every suggestion ended with the same sentence. It just makes financial sense. I always answered the same way. I'll think about it. That seemed to frustrate her more than any argument could. The following Friday, I drove to the commercial district downtown. Most people who passed the buildings saw warehouses, office parks, distribution centers. To me, they looked like 40 years of missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, missed vacations. Each property carried a memory. Warehouse 1. I signed those construction papers the morning Daniel graduated high school. Building 3. Helen picked the brick herself because she wanted the place to look respectable. The logistics center. I almost lost everything during the recession keeping that project alive. Every address represented another chapter of my life. None of them had ever belonged to Daniel. Not even for a minute. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot beside me. Out stepped Monica Alvarez, president of Hawthorne Commercial Holdings, the company leasing every one of my buildings. She shook my hand warmly. Walter, You haven't changed. You say that every year, because every year it's still true. We toured the newest distribution center together. Near the loading docks, she handed me a thick report. I've been meaning to discuss something. I glanced at the cover, expansion proposal. We're planning to purchase our leased portfolio. I looked up. You want to buy all 7 properties? If you're interested. She named the figure. I didn't respond immediately. It wasn't just a large number. It was the largest offer I'd ever received in my life. Monica continued. We'd rather negotiate directly with you than wait for your estate to become involved someday. She paused. Frankly, we don't know who will inherit everything, but we'd prefer not to negotiate with people we've never met. Those words stayed with me. People we've never met. That evening Evelyn called. I've spoken with Monica. You work fast. I've worked with her firm for 15 years. And, she asked one interesting question. What was it? If something happened to you tomorrow, who would actually control those properties? I answered without thinking. My son. Evelyn stayed quiet. Then she asked another question. Would that make your tenants feel secure? I already knew the answer, sir. No, Daniel had never negotiated a commercial lease, never managed industrial property, never overseen multi-million-dollar maintenance schedules. He didn't even know where 2 of the buildings were located. Yet he assumed ownership was inevitable. 2 days later, that assumption finally slipped into the open. Sunday dinner had barely begun when Melissa unfolded a brochure across the table. Swimming pools, medical services, private dining. She smiled brightly. Walter, I think we've found the perfect place for you. Daniel nodded immediately. It's time, Dad. I looked at the brochure, then at both of them. When exactly were you planning to move into my house? Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. For the first time, they realized I knew, but what they still didn't realize was that while they were busy planning where I would live, 2 of the largest commercial real estate firms in the state had already begun competing for assets they believed would soon be available. And I was about to make a decision that would leave Daniel inheriting something he had never expected. I didn't answer Melissa's question. Instead, I folded the retirement brochure, slid it back across the table, finished my coffee, and stood. Daniel frowned. So, what does that mean? It means I'll let you know when I've made a decision. Melissa forced a smile. We're only trying to help. I know. That was all I said. People become careless when they think they've already won. I had no intention of correcting them. Not yet. Monday morning, I met Monica again. This time, there was no tour. Waiting in the conference room were 3 people I had never met before, a commercial banker, a tax attorney, and another executive from Hawthorne Commercial Holdings. Monica closed the door. Walter, we'd like to make a formal offer. She slid a binder across the polished table. Every one of my 7 properties had been professionally valued, not based on what they had been worth when I retired, based on today's market. I turned to the final page. The purchase price made me sit back. It was nearly double what I had quietly estimated in my own mind. Monica smiled. We're not just buying buildings, we're buying certainty. There's one condition, I said. The room became quiet. I won't sell to anyone who intends to lay off the maintenance staff. Monica answered immediately. They all keep their jobs. The warehouse supervisors, everyone. The cleaning crews, they stay. The night security teams, everyone. I nodded. Then we're talking. One executive looked surprised. You didn't even negotiate the price. I smiled. I spent 40 years building businesses. I learned a long time ago, the way people treat employees tells you everything you'll ever need to know. That afternoon, I visited every property myself, not because I doubted the inspection reports, because I wanted to say goodbye. Warehouse number 1. I still remembered carrying drywall with Helen because we couldn't afford another worker. Distribution Center 3. Daniel had ridden his bicycle through the empty building before the concrete floor was even sealed. Showroom 7. Helen insisted every customer should see fresh flowers near the entrance. She claimed people trusted places that felt alive. She was usually right. I walked through every hallway slowly, not mourning the buildings, thanking them. They had given my family a wonderful life. When I returned home, Daniel's SUV was already parked in my driveway. He wasn't alone. Melissa sat beside him. Neither looked happy. We need to talk, Daniel said before I reached the porch. About the properties. I looked at him carefully. What about them? My friend works in commercial lending. He heard Hawthorne ordered new appraisals. I stayed silent, Daniel continued. You're selling. I might. Melissa crossed her arms. You should have told us. Why? Because it affects the family. I almost smiled. No, it affects me. Daniel's patience snapped. You can't make decisions like this by yourself. I stared at him. I've been making decisions by myself since before you were born. He took one step closer. What happens to our inheritance if you sell? There it was. Not concern, not curiosity. The real question. I looked directly into his eyes. So that's what this is really about. He opened his mouth but couldn't find another answer. Melissa jumped in quickly. We're just trying to understand. No. You're trying to calculate. Neither of them denied it. That evening I met Evelyn one final time. She placed 2 sealed envelopes on her desk. The property sale documents and she tapped the second envelope. The revised estate plan. I looked at it for a long moment. I haven't signed anything yet. I know. She smiled. But before you do, I think there's something you deserve to see. She reached into another file and handed me a certified copy of a document. It wasn't from my estate. It wasn't from the property sale. It was a business loan application. Borrower, Daniel Grayson, collateral listed. Expected inheritance from Walter Grayson estate. Estimated value, that $24,800,000. I read the page twice, then a third time. My signature wasn't there. My permission wasn't there. But my death had already become part of my son's business plan. For the first time since I overheard that conversation around the dining table, I stopped wondering whether I should rewrite my will and started wondering whether Daniel deserved to receive anything at all. I never confronted Daniel about the loan application. Not because I was protecting him, because I wanted one answer before I made the biggest decision of my life. If he thought I was already dead, how far was he willing to go while I was still breathing? The answer arrived faster than I expected. 3 days later, my banker called. Walter, I've received an unusual inquiry. What kind? Someone asked whether your investment accounts were jointly titled. They're not. They also wanted to know whether your commercial properties had been transferred into a family trust. I didn't have to ask who. The banker continued carefully. I didn't disclose anything, but whoever called already believed they were entitled to the information. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Daniel wasn't waiting for an inheritance anymore. He was investigating it. 2 weeks later, Hawthorne Commercial Holdings completed its due diligence. Monica invited me to their headquarters one final time. Everything was ready, the contracts, the tax structure, the employee protection agreements. She placed a fountain pen beside the final page. If you sign today, the transaction closes in 30 days. I looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, 45 years of work, reduced to one signature. Then I signed. Not because I wanted the money, because I no longer wanted my family's future tied to buildings they had started treating like lottery tickets. The sale became public 8 days later. Commercial newspapers covered it. Business journals called it one of the largest private industrial property transactions in the region that year. Daniel found out exactly the same way everyone else did. From the news, he called 16 times before noon. I answered on the 17th. Dad, why didn't you tell me? You never asked. You sold everything. Yes. What happens to my inheritance now? I closed my eyes. Even then, that was still his first concern. 3 nights later, Daniel arrived at my house. This time he wasn't angry. He was desperate. Melissa stood behind him, unusually quiet. Dad, we made mistakes. I said nothing. He continued. The investors found out. They're asking questions. What questions? They expected. He stopped. I finished the sentence for him. They expected you to inherit enough money to guarantee the business. He slowly nodded. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then I asked one question. How many people did you promise my estate to? His silence answered better than words ever could. The following Monday, Evelyn scheduled the final estate meeting. Not because the documents needed changes, because I wanted witnesses. Monica attended, my banker attended, my accountant attended. Daniel and Melissa sat across the table, believing they were about to negotiate. Instead, Evelyn opened the new estate plan. Walter Grayson has revoked all previous wills. Daniel swallowed hard. She continued reading. Several charitable foundations received significant gifts. The local technical college received funding to create skilled trade scholarships in Helen's name. Long-time employees who had stayed with me for more than 20 years each received generous bequests. Every grandchild received an education trust that no parent could access. Then Evelyn reached the final section. The remainder of Mr. Grayson's estate shall be administered through the Helen Grayson Legacy Foundation. Daniel interrupted. What does that mean? Evelyn looked directly at him. It means no individual inherits control of the estate. The assets will continue producing scholarships, apprentice programs, housing grants for injured tradespeople, and emergency assistance for employees' families. Daniel's face turned white. And me? Evelyn calmly turned the last page. You receive $1. The room became completely silent, not because of the amount, because attached beneath it was a handwritten letter. Daniel opened it with trembling hands. He recognized his mother's handwriting immediately. Helen had written it years before she died, not knowing when it would ever be read. If you're reading this because your father believed money mattered more to you than people, then I failed to teach you the lesson he spent his entire life living. Your father built buildings. I watched him build character. If you chose the buildings instead, you were never ready to inherit either. Daniel couldn't finish the letter. He buried his face in his hands. Melissa cried quietly beside him. Neither of them argued. There was nothing left to argue. A year later, the Helen Grayson Legacy Foundation opened its first apprenticeship center. Hundreds of young electricians, welders, carpenters, and mechanics received scholarships funded by assets that would have become nothing more than another inheritance. Daniel eventually closed his struggling business, not because I ruined him, because it had been built on promises he never had the right to make. Months later, he came to the apprenticeship center carrying a toolbox. I heard you need volunteer instructors. I looked at him for a long moment. Every Saturday, no pay. He nodded. I know. I handed him a work apron. Then be here at 8. That was all. Forgiveness wasn't spoken. It was earned. As I watched him teach a 16-year-old apprentice how to square a cabinet frame, I realized something Helen had understood long before I did. Money can be inherited. Respect never can. And the greatest legacy I left my family wasn't the fortune they expected. It was the chance to become the kind of people worthy of building one themselves.